fellow speakers, members of the International Organizing Committee of the Asia-Europe People's Forum, and friends. I bring you greetings of peace and solidarity from Malaysia. In the next, did you say 10 minutes or 15 minutes? No. 5 minutes. In the next 5 minutes, I am really going to try to talk about two sets of issues, which actually will take you something like a 2-week seminar. One on the elite control of our states, specifically talking about the transboundary corporate capture through free trade agreements, and number two, the rising inequality in Asia. There are many other issues, climate and so on and so forth, but people have other people with more expertise can speak on that. But I'm going to focus on this set of issues, though. Two sets of issues. One on the elite control of the elite corporate capture of the state, namely the transboundary corporate capture, and secondly on inequality. Now, if we like to track the capture of the state, there's a way of doing it, and there's a lot of economic literature behind it. We start off by looking at the regulatory capture of the state, then it moves to state capture of the state, and finally now we have the transboundary capture of the state. What is regulatory capture of the state? Essentially, Richard Posner argued that people who were representatives of corporations were sitting in commissions and were regulating their own companies and working in the interests of their own companies in these commissions. And of course, these commissions are set up by governments in the hope that it will serve public interests. But clearly, here you have a case of gatekeepers playing poachers, though. Gatekeepers who are playing poachers, meaning people who themselves own, manage and run industries or privatize water services and so on, themselves regulate their own industry. So that's regulatory capture. Then you move on to the state capture, where you have various interests. It could be farm interests, it could be business interests, it could be a bank interest and so on, colluding and influencing public officials in order to influence policies, regulations, taxation possible, and to ensure that the interests of the elites are maintained. So you have second level of capture. But now, the more recent development through the free trade agreements, you have this transboundary corporate capture, which now allows your governments or the people that you vote for and who win elections to be sued at a private tribunal, by a private arbitration tribunal. And this private arbitration tribunal is actually quite fantastic. Whoever thought about it is really good, though. Because one, it can, not only can you can sue, but it can review and you challenge state laws. These are governments who have been elected, who make laws on behalf of their people, and now that law can be challenged. The decisions made or the judgments made in the courts, domestic courts, can be challenged and overthrown. And you have a situation where decisions or legislations passed in your parliaments can also be overthrown. So the state is undermined, parliament is undermined, the judicial system of a country is also undermined by this challenge in a tribunal that is outside of the country. And these tribunals are made up of 3 people who are not elected, unaccountable, who are lawyers, who represent governments in one meeting or in one arbitration, and can represent business in another arbitration. These are what you call for-profit arbitrators. But the decision in which they make has implications for all countries that are part of the agreement. For example, if your country is part of the UN Convention, the decision made in this arbitration council of 3 people, unelected and undemocratic, their decision has an impact on all countries. So now they have become the new doyens, if you want. They have become the disciplinarians of governments, and more importantly, their decisions become the new constitution in which your governments, you and I, have to listen to and follow and adhere. Let me give you a good example, though. There are many examples of this, but I want to give you a very good example which shows how a decision at this tribunal has implications for many, many, many countries. And that's the case of plain packaging. The case of plain packaging. Uruguay wanted to introduce plain packaging, and all they said was, we want 82% of the cigarette boxes to have warnings saying that this is bad for your health, smoking is bad for your health, and have images of bad tooth, bad lungs, and so on, and black heart, and so on and so forth, on the cover of cigarette boxes. Right away, Philip Morris used a trade agreement or a bilateral... Oh my God, I just started though. Okay. All right, okay. Now, as soon as Uruguay said that they wanted to formulate this policy of plain packaging, Philip Morris said, over our dead bodies, you're not going to do that though. And they said, we're going to refer you to the exit body, which will have arbitrators making a decision whether this is fair to business interests, whether it's just to the business interests. Now, if you thought it was only for Uruguay, Australia too had the same problem. Australia too said, we want to have 80% of our cigarette boxes in plain packaging, warnings. And today, and the issue was raised in the local courts. Philip Morris raised the issue, took the issue to the local courts, and the local courts told Philip Morris that the government of Australia has the right, in public interest, health interest, in order to implement plain packaging. Philip Morris said, oh, our dead bodies, and they referred Australia to exit, the arbitration body. Now, that's only for Australia. Malaysia, I asked the question in Parliament, I said, is Malaysia going to follow the example of Australia in plain packaging? The answer we got was, we are awaiting a decision in exit between between Australia and Uruguay. Australia and Philip Morris. Now, it's not only in Malaysia, even New Zealand in 2013 wanted to introduce plain packaging, but they have put the decision on hold. Why? Because they are saying, we are waiting for the outcome of the decision between Philip Morris and Australia. So my friends, do you see the implications of this decision, of the decisions of Philip Morris? One, they can take the decision of a government for arbitration at a court outside of their country. Number two, in the case of Uruguay, as I said earlier, Philip Morris used a bilateral agreement to go after Uruguay. And the bilateral agreement was between Uruguay and Switzerland. In that bilateral agreement, there is a carve-out. There is a carve-out which says, on public health issues, you cannot sue the government. It says very clearly. But despite that, Philip Morris has taken Uruguay to court. So carve-out in BITs doesn't matter. You can throw it away. Judgments of local courts in the case of Australia doesn't matter. You can throw it away. In the case of chill, regulatory chill, New Zealand cannot make policies because of that agreement. Malaysia cannot make a decision on plain packaging because awaiting the decision of exit. And you have studies showing from the United Nations to Australia to Uruguay saying that plain packaging is good. The exit body threw out all of this and said, we will have to make a decision. Now, and that decision is binding. That decision is binding. So my friends, what I want to suggest to you is, while we are here busy caucusing, there are people outside of this place who are telling us that you caucus all that you want, but we are going to become the supra-national institution which will decide the future of your countries. And in so doing, they are writing the new constitution in which you and I have to follow, including our governments. It's very clear, parliaments have no role in this place, governments have no role, as well as the courts, all of which is downplayed. I want to leave you, just one second, just leave you with a very interesting comment made by an arbitrator, a Spanish arbitrator, who has this to say though. And he says, when I wake up at night and think about arbitration, it never ceases to amaze me that sovereign states have agreed to investment arbitration at all. 3 private individuals are entrusted with the power to review, without any restriction or appeal procedure, all actions of the government, all decisions of the courts, and all laws and regulations coming from the parliament. Now the question you want to ask is, why is your government handing over their responsibility to this tribunal? We'll come back to answer that question. Thank you very much. Thanks for your attention.